Hello, scholars. So, this video is a little late, but I wanted to post it anyway so that you guys would be able to review it, not only for the purpose of completing assignments this week if you have not already completed them, but for use in the future when you need to review it for understanding what's necessary for your presentations or for review for your midterm and final examinations. So this week we are going over chapter 9, and chapter 9 is on organizational patterns. Organizing your speech is, I believe, what the title of the chapter is in the book. Let's get right into it. We're going to share, maximize. Okay, organizing the speech. So when you think about organizing the speech, we're thinking about structuring the information that we're including. And predominantly, we're thinking about the main points that will be outlined for our speech. So you do this in an effort to make sure that your information has a flow and that your audience members are able to keep up with you and understand the overarching goals of your presentation. Remember, the whole point of communication is using messages to generate meaning. You want your audience members to understand exactly what you're talking about. In your outline or during your speech, you usually will have 2 to 5 main points. You don't want to have less than 2 main points for the average presentation. And if you start doing more than 5, your speech will probably get pretty lengthy. For this class, most of our speeches will have around 3 main points. That seems to be the norm for most speeches. In regard to organizational patterns, the first that we will talk about that is outlined in the textbook is chronological order. Chronological order deals with time and sequence. There is a bit of a difference between time and sequence. In our society, we have already decided that time has particular parameters. We have already defined seconds, minutes, days, weeks, months, seasons, years, decades, centuries. We have all these classifications for time that are definite and understood on a societal level. Regarding sequence, time isn't always the most important thing. Sequence deals with the idea that something has occurred already, something may be happening right now, and there's the expectation that something will happen after. So it's more along the pattern of first, second, third, last, for instance. Here's an example. Esports began in the 1980s. Esports became a global phenomenon during the 1990s. Esports flourished through official tournaments in the 2000s. This is an example of the idea of time being the organizational pattern for our presentation, using decades, of course. Spatial order. Spatial order deals with directional pattern. In this instance, we'll be talking about location and proximity. The example that I gave in class was when I learned about the planets. When I learned of the planets, I learned them in order of closeness to the sun. So we were following a direction. We were going from Mercury to Venus to Earth, so on and so forth. Another example might be giving directions. On this campus in particular, we have building A, B, C, D, so on and so forth. If you were to give a tour, and as you're giving the tour, you're following a directional pattern, and you're talking about each building in relation to their location on the campus, that would also be spatial order. This example is of a hurricane. At the center of a hurricane is the calm, cloud-free eye. Then the speaker begins to work out from the eye. So you can discuss in direction from innermost to outermost. Second main point, surrounding the eye is the eye wall. Third main point, rotating around the eye wall are large bands of clouds. As you can see, there's a directional pattern of information. Let's watch this video.
Now that we've looked at the relatively calm eye of the hurricane, let's take a look at the next ring of the storm. Surrounding the eye of the hurricane is the eye wall, a dense ring of clouds that produce the most wind and rainfall. It's very hard to see the eye wall from above, but you can see it more clearly in this graphic. The eye is the lighter colored area in the middle, and the eye wall is the darker area on the sides. Winds in the eye wall exceed 155 miles per hour, which is why this part of the storm can cause so much destruction.
As you could tell from that video, this individual is discussing the parts of the hurricane, and he is doing so in regard to the direction from innermost to outermost. Causal order. As previously mentioned, there are some presentations that will have only two main points. Some organizational patterns lend themselves to this notion that some speeches will only have two main points. One of these organizational patterns is causal order. Causal order is also known as cause and effect order because we are discussing a cause and effect type relationship. Basically, we're suggesting that as a result of one thing, something else has subsequently occurred. Anytime that you have main points and you can put the word subsequently between those two main points, then more than likely you are using a causal or cause and effect order. Here's an example. The United States faces a growing shortage of trained nurses in all parts of the country. If this shortage continues, it will strain the entire healthcare system. Another example might be, as a result of the increased use of motor vehicles in the United States, the depletion of the ozone layer has drastically increased. Maybe. All right, another organizational pattern that lends itself to two main points is the problem solution organizational pattern. In this example, the first main point would be the problem. What has happened to cause something to occur? The second main point would be the solution. What things might be done in order to fix the issues that have been caused? A major difference between causal organizational pattern and problem solution organizational pattern is that causal organization pattern probably is going to be an informative presentation, whereas problem solution, as it is presenting a solution or a call to action that you might be persuaded to do, then that is more than likely going to be a persuasive presentation. Here's an example. Puppy mills are a serious problem across the United States. Solving the problem requires legislation and individual initiatives. So we know in this speech, the speaker is talking about puppy mills as the problem, and he or she is going to present potential solutions, both legislation and individual initiatives that might be used as solutions. Here's an example.
In addition to suffering from physical problems, dogs in puppy mills are often emotionally unstable. Some are dangerously violent and aggressive. Others are apathetic and lack any desire to interact with people or animals. Because of the overcrowding in puppy mills, some animals literally go crazy and chew off the ears, legs, and tails of other dogs. But you can see for yourself what the dogs have to endure. Here's a picture of a puppy mill provided by the U.S. Humane Society. As you can see, the cages are stacked one on top of another, and the dogs are packed into the cages like sardines into a can. The dogs are not let out to go to the bathroom, so the cages are filled with waste and become breeding grounds for the diseases I mentioned earlier in my speech. You can get a better sense of how disgusting a puppy mill is from this photo. taken after the dogs were removed by animal officials. You can see how narrow the cages are and how they're crammed one against the other. You can see that there's filth and debris everywhere.
Topical organization pattern is a pattern that's used when there is an overarching category of items that will be discussed, and you're going to break down those subtopics as the main points of your presentation. For an example, you might be talking about an individual, and there are various aspects of the individual that you want to discuss. Those main points would be subtopics of that individual. Similarly, you might be talking about something that is traditionally categorized, something like sports. If we wanted to talk about sports that are very popular in the United States, our main points might be that basketball, football, and baseball are very popular sports played here in the United States. As the example I just discussed, we are going to talk about Josephine Baker, who captivated audiences, who was a spy basically for the World War II, and who was also a civil rights activist. Here are some suggestions for your main points. Make sure that you keep your main points separate. You do not want to confuse your audience members by clumping main points together without any type of transitional statements. You also want to try to use the same pattern of wording. Speeches similar to that of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech remind people of his main points because of the use of cadence. You can use cadence in your speeches also. Try to balance the time between each of your main points. It would not be beneficial if you spent 5 minutes talking about basketball in the speech that I mentioned previously, and then only 1 minute talking about football and 1 minute talking about baseball. More than likely, your audience members would focus on the idea that you talked about basketball the most, and then they would assume that your speech was about basketball, or at least that might be what they suggest to other individuals. We've already talked about supporting materials when we talked about gathering these materials from the library, from librarians, from interviews, and from the internet. It's important that for each of your main points, you have supporting material that strengthens the idea of that main point. For instance, if I were going to talk about basketball as one of my main points, I might mention some of the famous stars and the money that they make as a result of the popularity of the sport in the United States. That would be some of my supporting information. Connectives are words or phrases connecting ideas. These connectives can come in a multitude of fashions: transitions, internal previews, internal summaries, and signposts. Transitions indicate that a speaker has finished one thought and is moving to another. As an example, you might say, I have spoken so far of Cesar Chavez, the community organizer, but it was his work as a labor leader that truly etched his name in American history. In this example, you can see that the speaker has already talked about Cesar Chavez as a community organizer. And the next main point that will be discussed is the fact that he was also a labor leader. An internal preview is a statement in the body indicating what speakers will discuss next. The example is, in discussing how Asian Americans have been stereotyped in the mass media, we'll look first at the origin of the problem and second at its continuing impact today. This is a preview of what should be expected after this statement. You know, if you use such a preview as this, that one of the main points in the presentation is that there is something that happened that caused the problem, origins of the problem. And you will also hear that there is some type of continued impact today, something that is the effect of the original problem. An internal summary is a statement in the body summarizing preceding points, a preceding point or points. Here's an example. In short, palm reading is an ancient art developed in China more than 5,000 years ago. It was practiced in classical Greece and Rome, flourished during the Middle Ages, survived the Industrial Revolution, and remains popular today in many parts of the world. This summary explains that I have already discussed as main points in my presentation that it was practiced in Greece and Rome, that it flourished in the Middle Ages, that it survived the Industrial Revolution, and it remains popular today. Signposts are known as brief statements showing where speaker is or where a speaker is in or focusing attention on key ideas. An example is the first cause of this problem is inefficient agricultural production. The second cause is recurrent drought in the affected countries. And the final cause is mismanagement of available food resources by local leaders. This statement might be included in the very beginning of the presentation to note that we are going to talk about the problem. We're also going to talk about recurring drought. We're also going to talk about mismanagement. All right, guys, those are all the slides. I will upload these slides in a folder labeled lecture slides or lecture PowerPoints. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out at any time via email, phone, or text. Have a great remainder of your week.